All right, it's 12 o'clock. We're going to start. And we are here with Mike Mitchell. And he is, I'm waving back. He is a Makey Makey fanatic who was an art high school teacher.
Correct.
And is now an art director over an entire county, which is the same as what we have as like a school district, I think, right?
That's
okay.
right.
Yeah, and Mike is also an artist, and he's also a musician, and he has a lot of really interesting stuff going on. And we're going to, first I'm going to ask you my first question, and then if you want to show us things, you can. But I have to stop for 1 second. I just noticed we have someone from Moscow in here, and I think we have never had anyone from that far away. So hello. They did not put a first name. They put C. Wild and Greed. So hello in Moscow. So I love this concept. When we first started talking, you called yourself, South Africa and France. Now they're all chiming in. We love this concept of digital settlers, right? I think that's a really interesting term. I remember when I started teaching, we were always talking about digital natives, and we kind of pushed that term away. But I like this term. So tell me in your words why you consider yourself a digital settler.
Well, first of all, I dated my wife without the internet. And so I also dated my wife without cell phones. And so I feel like in that way, you know, I don't consider myself old. I'm 44, but I'm still in a weird spot. I'm on this side of when I taught high school, like the students could not understand that I dated my wife without being able to text her or Snapchat her or post something on Instagram. Like it was just, and it wasn't like they were like, ooh, it was such a foreign idea that you could not communicate constantly with this person. And so, you know, so for me, that is the beginning of digital settler. It's just like how you are connected personally, but then also just professionally, you know, I started working with kids before you could just post everything, before you could create a community like now where there are people from Moscow and Austin and this tiny little town, Mount Pleasant, Tennessee, connecting to the entire world. And so that for me is a digital settler, someone who the internet was something that you had to come to. It was invented. Obviously, it was invented in my lifetime, and had I been in the right place, I could have connected to it much earlier. But as far as just the way we kind of think about being able to kind of just arrive at the internet, my son is a digital native in that he has never lived in a house without an iPhone. He's never lived in a house where there isn't an internet connection. And I think that is a lot of kids now. And for me, having to come to all of that, and then as a professional, really kind of being won over by how those tools could help me better serve a group of students. That's really when I kind of became a settler, was when I started to understand, when I started kind of moving west, so to speak, to say like, yeah, it's better out there because I can actually utilize these tools to help kids discover their voice. And that voice meaning their artistic voice.
Yeah, I thought I noticed like on your Instagram and some of your feeds, like and this term sound artist too. So I want to come to that, but I noticed that you were already teaching kids to make noise in a very interesting way, but you brought Makey Makey in probably in a little different way than we would expect too. And you actually have only been using Makey. How long have you been using Makey Makey with your students?
Just about a year, really. You guys, I guess, sponsored an event at the Adventure Science Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. And so my friend Megan Kelly, who's just an incredible artist in person, and you know, doodle note taker, and just she just does a bunch of stuff with Make Nashville and the maker movement in Nashville. She led that workshop. She works there, and so it was like being able to go to a workshop with a friend. But she just, once I had the banana where we were touching the banana, it was making noise. Like I was ready to, I could have probably just, that would have been enough for me. I'm glad that I've moved into showing kids how to use Scratch and those kinds of things. But I would have been fine with that. I would have been fine just with the MK1 sampler that Eric Rosenbaum put online. Like I could have lived with that forever. Just locked myself in a room and just made noise with it.
Yeah. I remember seeing this spring a video of you playing the piano, and you kind of had like alligator clips click to your hand, or maybe your glasses, and like all kinds of other things hooked to the piano to make different noises. And it really reminded me of John Cage. So I was wondering if you were a John Cage fan.
For sure. I mean, I am. I mean, I go to the Big Ears Music and Arts Festival, which is like an experimental music festival in Knoxville every year. And also just as someone who went through the American, MFA program when I did in the early 2000s, John Cage he looms large because he's one of those people that, 433 will be talked about forever. It will forever be talked about. That performance. If you're not familiar with the performance, he sat down at a grand piano and did not play it for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And then the ensuing kind of quote silence became, depending on who was watching that performance, either really a wonderful new way to kind of think about music and sound, or it just made people really angry and they like walked out of the theater. And of course for him, that noise and those doors moving were part of the score.
Yeah, and part of both those things are art. Like the making people who are hearing all the sounds, but people getting angry, giving them emotions, like on something you're doing is part of art. And so I like this concept of sound art. I think it really ties in well with John Cage, and like when he would, put weird things on the pianos to make pianos make strange sounds, but you can do that with kids because noise, like we all like to make noise, right? So I wanted to know, how do you teach kids to make noise? Like, how do you let them know it's okay to it's noise and it's not a music note? And how do you actually teach them the art of making noise?
That's a really interesting question. My experience has been the hardest part of that is to get them to make the noise, as opposed to just going to the internet and then finding kind of noises that have already been given to them. So, and I think that's so one of the things is having lots of found objects on hands. A big thing that I have found, it's not a makey, but then it builds into it. And one of the things I have found is like mixing all those things. So you can, there are these little microphones that clip onto an instrument. They're about $10 online. They call them clip mics. There's a brand called Korg, K-O-R-G, and that plugs with an 1/8" jack just into like an amplifier. And that clip, you've probably, if you dive into my feed on Studio 4 Dimension, which was my teaching, where I taught, you can clip that to any single thing. You can clip it to like your ID badge. There's a picture of a kid clipping it to like a Pringles potato chip. And there's something about being able to amplify just regular sounds that makes kids start thinking about sounds. And so that has been an entryway for me, is that like a really great one is just putting it on a pencil and then dragging it across the paper. That's great. These kids right here, they're mixing Makey Makey. She's recording a guitar. So this is Mira. Go ahead.
I'm going to hit play so they can hear it and see it, but I want to know what this little funny speaker thing is, because I saw her with that in videos too, and maybe that's the Korg thing you're saying, and we might have to type it out because this is pretty awesome. All right.
That's what, go ahead.
Yeah. They can hear it or not. Can y'all hear it? Okay, I'm not going to play the whole bit, but like to me, just getting kids to be comfortable with taking what someone else might see as trash and making it into your musical instrument. I mean, you've already hit all the makey things without even using a makey.
Well, and actually we are using the makey because if you notice that she has Scratch open on that laptop, so they're recording all that into
to make a makey, yeah.
So then they had a keyboard that you could press it and you would hear what they just played, which is a really great way to even, like, they could create loops with that they could play. I mean, these kids, both of these girls went to the Southern Girls Rock Camp the week after my camp and like played in bands with other kids their age. But I love that I put in their head these alternate ideas of like, you don't have to hit the chords right. Like you can make music, like everyone has a voice. And I think that's why I like sound art, is it takes away, most of the times, by the time kids get a certain age, they've been told they have a good voice or not. And I think that's such a disservice to kids, is to say that someone's voice isn't good. It's like the thing that they use to communicate, and to position them to say that their voice is not good, especially in a world where, I mean, my kid loves Cardi B, but like she doesn't sound that good. Like it's all auto-tuned, which I don't think is bad, because so has lots of country stuff been auto-tuned. Like I don't mind a product being polished, but to compare kids to that is a big problem for me, is to say that their voice isn't good because it doesn't have a $50,000 kind of production behind it. So I think sound art, for me, one of the kind of big kind of politics behind it for me is to kind of undo that idea of like music education, where you're like trying to get to this spot as if this spot's bad and this spot's good. This is in tune. I mean, this is in tune and this is out of tune, and there's a hierarchy. It's just positioning kids, like you said, to just that noise, like anything that's coming out is also okay and can be interesting, and you can put it in different kind of context. And that's where the Makey Makey, I think, comes in. There's something about that filter that allows them, when they put it into Scratch and then they push a button and they're not the ones making it, that maybe it's the anonymity to that they're not making that sound and people can't judge them. I mean, they're middle schoolers, so they're really concerned about themselves and how they're perceived by their peers. But there's something about it. And my experience has been K through adults, is that it's just this really fun kind of thing.
Yeah. So what is this little blue speaker thing?
It is a Dan Electro.
Okay.
It is it's just a little amplifier. They are online they're battery powered. They turn on, and I think they have one other knob that you can control tone. They're fantastic. It's such a great way. My experience, it's a great way. Kids just love it. That clip mic. And then for me, it's about mixing that then. Once they start experimenting with those noises, is then building them into the Scratch program. Because personally, I like the noises that they invent that come from them. So weird scratching down the guitar, and most of the time, it's all it takes is that microphone. Something about making it loud with kids allows them to want to investigate more.
I bet it's the loudness and the recording, because the recording makes them like, it takes away that fear of performance that they might have had to do it the other way. So.
And that's exactly, I think what you said, that fear of performance, I think is a big part. When you ask them if they are a musician or their voice, they mean, can I stand on stage and entertain people like Taylor Swift can? And of course you can't. Like, I mean, that's because she's Taylor Swift. Like, she is a unique individual. But my thought is, can you make interesting sounds, and can you then control how, like, I loved the editing part that started happening this summer with those kids. They suddenly were like, their voice was real, their digital voice, in the sense of how they implicitly kind of know, because they were born with the internet, kind of how to piece stuff together and collage it together. And they have a lot of ideas about that. So they might not feel real comfortable about their voice, but they're producing like kind of ego. They feel real confident about how to like put those things together and edit them.
You know, I actually saw a statistic, I think I remember sharing it with my kids when I was teaching high school, but I remember seeing a statistic that children now, like they take content on the web and remix it. Like 90% of our kids do that. Like they are remixers. They love to take things and edit it and make it their own and then put it out there. I mean, think about how a meme has been born, right? Like that wasn't even a thing,
right.
like 15 years ago. So I want to hear, I think that the audience too wants to hear a little more about how the STEAM camp goes from start to finish. Cause like I said, I'm also a fan of Eins Jorgensen de Neubauten. So like, I really love noise, but I've never thought of trying to make my students create noise as art and then combine it up with Makey Makey and Scratch. Like it's all pretty amazing. So if you just walk us through a little bit of what your camp was like.
Yeah, and real quickly, I just saw that somebody asked how we were recording. So we were doing two things. We were using Audacity, which is a free recording program. What I love about Audacity is I recently was at a private school. Before that, I've been in public school as an educator and as a student my whole life. And then now I'm back in public school. But I really try to use Audacity because I really think it's like the number 2 pencil of the internet, right? Like
Yeah.
it's translated into 86 different languages. It's open source, like it's free. You can sell Audacity online. They actually will help you do it if you want to package it with a product. So I just really like it because, you know, positioning kids to take something home is really important, like to be able to do it at home. And then we're also recording straight into Scratch. That microphone is, the recording microphone is kind of terrible from the standpoint of like trying to do music, but it also, it makes weirder sounds. So it's like, you know, it's kind of like,
Fun.
you know, it's like cat power, you know, she's holding that guitar to the amp to make it get weird feedback. And so it does sometimes, and they'll go like, wow. And it interestingly has 3 or 4 little things. You can make it echo, and you can really play around with the sound in the inside of Scratch a lot more than you might think you could.
What's the name of that microphone?
The clip-on.
The clip-on, it was Korg, K-O-R-G.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
People were asking.
Yeah, and you can also buy, they're called contact mics. There's little circle ones. They're almost like little $5 ones. A lot of people put those on like mandolins or ukuleles on acoustic instruments.
Oh, I bet it's like a piezo inside. We made guitars before where you take the piezo and it can amplify.
I'm almost sure that's what it is. All right, so the STEAM camp, I was asked, it's at a middle school that my son went to, and both my older brothers went to 30 years ago, in East Nashville, in Inglewood. And so I taught a 1-hour class. And so the students came in, and we were there for 10 days. So they walked in, I had about 10 kids, some of whom I had a little bit of a relationship with, some of who were brand new to me. I don't teach at that school, and I've never taught middle school from day to day. I've only done middle school for after school and summer. As a teacher, I taught elementary full time, and I've taught high school full time. So what I did is we kind of just started really quickly. We opened up we had 3 Scratch accounts that I'd created. I'd created Tennessee Explorers 1, Tennessee Explorers 2, Tennessee Explorers 3 Scratch accounts online. And then that way there were groups of 3 kids kind of working together who could log in. I built the login number. I just made everything where it was easy and we didn't lose any time because I only had an hour a day. So the kids were able to log in. We used the worst computers ever. They were 10-year-old Dells. I mean, but it worked, right? So that's what I like about Scratch and Audacity. Those things still work with those basic things. And we just immediately started, I took pictures of them, printed them out the second day. There was a picture that on the slideshow of them, they made sound self-portraits. So they did like metal tape around themselves, and they had to create some sound. So we just immediately started diving into, I showed them how the Makey Makey worked, and talked a little bit about what sound art was, in that it was the same as other art, is that there was a big range of it. You know, there's stuff that looks like something. There are things that sound like something. And there are visual artworks that don't look like anything. So non-objective or abstract art. And then there's sound art that doesn't sound like anything. And so we just kind of talked about how sound art, the idea that sound is the thing, right? It's not a drawing. Even though the interfaces for Makey Makey became very sculptural, but just the idea that it was okay. And it didn't have to be music, because a lot of those kids really know what music sounds like. And if you get caught in that loop, you're going to lose them, because they're going to just in their head go like, I'm not a musician. I don't know how to do this. So if you open up this space where anything is okay and give kids a computer and a Makey Makey, it's really interesting how little teaching you have to do, and how it becomes much more of the way you would teach a college class, is that you're just kind of pushing in and saying, well, have you thought about this? You know, it was really cool. So we did an hour each day. What I did was, I asked each of the groups to have a kind of finished product, meaning that there was a Scratch program that was built that had, either animations or images on there, and a Makey Makey interface. And so the goal was by the end of each 5-hour week that each group would have a finished product. The first one was kind of a rough draft. In the second week, some of the kids changed out and left, and we got new kids, but we kind of just stayed with it. And the second week is those were going to be more polished. At the end of each day, something that I have started doing a lot of in the last year was also kind of using a podcast as essentially like a formative assessment. So Anchor is a free podcasting web program.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just fantastic. And my experience is that I did it with my high school classes, and then I did it with these middle school kids, and kids love it. And they love it that it's on Spotify. They love it that they can just find it on iTunes and see them and hear themselves. So at the end of each hour, we would do a 5 to 10 minute, just kind of little review. Some of those were real formal. Like I had specific questions, and other ones I just walked up to him and said, tell me about what you guys are working on. So, I think to me, that's the beauty about, that kind of summer camp is the only tests are the ones that you as a teacher feel like you need to do. There's not an administrator looking over my shoulder saying we need this assessment or that assessment. The assessments were things that helped me understand where they needed to be in relationship to building more. I mean, I found out a ton about Scratch that I did not know from just those kids using them. I didn't know I really had never worked with it enough to even know that you could import pictures. And these kids just started and I didn't know, it was really interesting how quickly with kind of this group knowledge things started. And then they just would go help other kids, and they would put stuff in. And a bunch of the kids got real excited about remixing memes using Makey Makey. And that was really fun.
So you kind of hit on two of the questions I wanted to ask you about. So I'm going to bring you back around to them both. One was about using podcasts as reflections. I love that. I used to do podcasts as the writing assignment because it's just a different media that I think a lot of people need to think about when they are working with digital kids, right? Right. I've noticed that kids, when they make a podcast, they care more about, and this is true for Makey Makey and poetry that I usually do too, they care more about the way they sound than if they were standing in front of class trying to read the paper, shivering. So I also really love the idea that you're using it as reflection because, I think it's John Dewey that says there's no learning, there's only reflection of learning, right?
Right. Yeah.
So tell us more about, well, I guess you don't really have to tell us more about podcasts, but you basically just gave them 5 minutes to do a reflection as their podcast. And we'll post the link, you guys. Mike did give it to me the other day. Yeah. And then the other question was, how much Scratch instruction do you actually do? But it sounds like you don't do much. They just figure it out and they help each other.
Well, so in my high school, and it depends on what group of kids you're working with. I happen to be working with, I got lucky in that my group of kids had done Hour of Code. Almost all of them had done Hour of Code, and maybe half of them had some experience with Scratch. So I did not get bogged down with saying, okay, well, we're going to make sure you know Scratch. We just started. The kids who didn't know Scratch were able to kind of just catch up in real time. And then I just walked around because I only had 10 kids and double checked to make sure every kid did it. At the end of the week, they had to pass an assessment. It was my donut assessment. And I got up early and I went and got a bunch of donuts, and I'd taken their order the day before. Lots of Boston cream donut. I said, hey, if you need a paleo donut, we live in East Nashville, I can go get you a hipster donut. We can figure that out too. So I took their order of donuts. And so when I got there, they weren't sure what was going on with that. And so each kid had to open up Scratch. They had to create a sound inside of something. They had to then code it to tell Makey Makey to do it. And then when they were able to make that sound, touch the thing, actually I had to read it. They had to kind of explain it to me. Then they got the donut that they ordered. And so that was their assessment. And they were more than happy to take 5 minutes of their time to get to eat the donut that they had ordered. And so yeah, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just kind of, yeah, like whatever, you kids will figure it out. But I also knew there was a space when, those kids were able to do it. Interestingly, at the high school that I worked at, which was a Catholic school, some of the middle school kids had experience with Scratch when they were in middle school, and they'd done Hour of Code, and they were savvy with technology. Some of them had no experience at all. I mean, like none. And so I would have to sit down with some kids. And so when that's the case, I just take the time that I need to take with whatever group of kids that I need to take that time.
That's the thing that we didn't ask that I think we need clarity on. What size were their groups? Because normally, like what I do is I like to call them my software kid and my hardware kid. So I usually put a software and a hardware kid together, so that one kid might be more about making this physical option and the other kid might be better at the digital component, and they usually work well together.
That's a great idea. So we had groups of 3 and groups of 2.
Okay.
And
probably naturally did that. Like they naturally
right.
did it.
Yeah. And then when I taught in high school, when I had bigger classes, the way that I typically would do the Scratch program, I had 14 or 15 in my class. And again, depending on which kids, I kind of went what you were talking about. They kind of just naturally picked the hardware kids and software kids, which is, I think, a really, really cool way to kind of think about that. I wish I would have kind of thought about that. Someone, just to double check, I saw a question about privacy issues with kids. So it's one thing that I'm a dad, I have a kid who is at school and is dealing with it, like that's an issue for me. Every place that I'm ever at, we, at the private school I was at this summer camp, where I'm at now, I think American schools, there's a lot of people who are online who aren't from the U.S., I think are getting better and better at, just making sure that the parents know. And so there's a media release that all kids have to sign. Yeah. And to double down on that, I also ask kids if they want to be on social media. And if they don't, then I don't put them on social media. Like, I don't go, well, too bad your parents signed the media form, so you have to be on my Instagram feed. I typically say to them, like, look, like 12 nerds and my mom are watching this thing. So it's not like, or I'll just be like, I'll make the joke, like I'll be like, you about to get famous. You're on Mr. Mitchell's Instagram. Like there's going to be like 18 people know about you. My feed was bigger than that, but it's still, what it did for me was really, and I get the thing about privacy and those kinds of things, but it essentially is a self-contained closed circuit of 600 people at any given time that could pay attention, and from a teaching standpoint. And so, but I was really careful that kids, especially high schoolers, especially high school girls, I never, ever put a picture online that I did not show that kid first and made sure that she was really comfortable with that, right? Do you like the way your hair looks? If it's just the issue that you didn't like the picture, let's take it. And so I would retake them, and they would look at it and be like, oh yeah, that one looks great. You use that one for sure. And so, it was as simple as that, but it is, like, I think, a really, really, really valuable and important thing to kind of consider. Because
I think asking permission is great. And when I taught high school, I always had to ask permission, especially like you said, for girls. And the younger kids, I just film from back here and never show their face.
Right.
That's the other thing I do.
Yeah, and I typically follow the culture. Like right now, I'm at a brand new place, so I'm 20 days in and kind of getting used to the culture. So I was in a group with pre-K, right? Little tinies, they're so amazing, and they're making art. And so I was photographing, but again, just their hands. But the teacher, like the next day on her Twitter feed, it was just a video of the kids, like their faces and everything. And I'm like, okay, like that must be the culture that's here. Like I'm going to try to figure out like where my comfort level is in relationship to that and kind of hit a sweet spot. But I think also just figuring out the culture which you're working inside of. There are Instagram feeds that I follow that are super helpful to me, that are about art education or music or sound, that don't show any kids ever. Yeah. So I think we kind of get caught up in that it has to be this like full access, like I can see the kids' pores on their face. I don't think it has to be that.
Yeah.
But I think it was an important question that I want to make sure it touched on.
I wanted to ask about your own art and how you use Makey Makey in your own art. Or do you use Makey Makey in your own art? guess
I
that's
do. So certainly inside of like, I have an Instagram called Tenna Here. So it's kind of playing on the idea of Tennessee. And it has, it's a sound art project that I've started that, where someone can send me an Instagram post, right? They can tag me on it. They can go back and edit an old Instagram post and tag me on it.
Mhm.
And then I'll make a sound piece based off of that Instagram post.
Cool.
And so I use Makey Makey a lot in that. So my friend Jody Hayes is an artist here in Nashville, and she tagged me on a post. And then one of the things was I made these little jars, and I kind of painted them in the same colors as the painting that she had made. And I kind of just made a little kind of soundscape. So for people who are struggling with the idea of sound art, a way that I think about them are kind of little, like almost like kind of soundscapes, or like thinking about like the soundtrack for like a movie. You just take the movie out, right? Like, but so the sound is the thing. And then for me, what's been interesting is that sound connecting with the visual sculptural nature of like that physical interface for Makey Makey. I've gotten real interested as someone who studied sculpture, like how those things and wires look. A lot of times we try to hide all that stuff. I love the swirl and mess of all those things and the visual part. So in my own work, so as someone, I recently did a performance at Tennessee State University. I was invited into that space, which was exciting for me. It's a historically Black college and university here in Nashville. In the 90s, I was there and took a really important class that for me was really important personally, an African-American history class. And so to be invited back into that space was really exciting. And so one of the ways that I wanted to engage with that space that for me is pretty sacred is build. So I built a Makey Makey kind of interface with some traditional instruments, electric instruments and plug-in instruments. And so I kind of got up and talked and introduced it and said, and I basically built like a sound playground. And then the people in the audience came and we were holding hands. And so in some ways it was kind of like one part, like this is what Makey Makey is. And then very quickly, just like everyone who I've ever had the experience with immediately starts going like, oh, I know what this is. And then they just start hacking and figuring out how they're going to use it. And so that was really exciting, is to kind of use Makey Makey to kind of do more of a John Cage kind of performance piece, where there was a start because I started and kind of showed them how the diddly bow worked and how you could make this drum noise. And I had that. So they had the blue amp with the Korg thing that you could clip. So it's real fun to put that on the table with a ruler and you go boom and it makes the noise. And then for any science teachers in the conversation, sound artists, just it's huge opportunity to talk about the difference between like reverb and echo, and how those are actually two very different things that are just related. And all of the different, like how waves work. And so anyway, but I built this thing that then everyone kind of just moved into, and it was really, really lovely. And I think an interesting way, the feedback I got about it was really exciting, that it wasn't really, there wasn't really anything to it. The experience was the thing. The noise that was made and the music that was made and the sounds that each other made were the artwork. And so so I have that practice of kind of experiencing and really just, that was scary for me. That was terrifying to say, I'm going to take this Makey Makey and to a college university where people are expecting to see something that's quote important, and just trust that it really was, right? That this thing that could be built obviously with students, like young students in mind, to learn circuitry and learn coding, is also this very universal thing that everyone was excited to do that. I mean, just the ability, and to be quite honest, to be in a space in Nashville in the South where white folks and Black folks were holding hands to intentionally make sound art is a pretty like revolutionary idea in this historically Black space. And so that Makey Makey, to prove the point of like, this is this universal thing, like this thing works in any kind of environment. I know that that's kind of like heady or maybe like a little too conceptual. But for me, it was this really valuable thing. Like this translates, like this works for everybody. So that was really neat. So in my kind of more kind of quote traditional musician role, I have a character named Cowboy Conceptual, who's a a figment of my imagination. He's a folk singing cowboy art critic that I invented to kind of talk about my artwork. I also make paintings, I make sculptures, and that ego joke lasted about 20 minutes before I realized his real ability would be to go into gallery spaces of friends and people who I wanted to talk to, and he would make up songs about their artwork and he would give them some attention. And so,
I love that.
but he has a record coming out, a 7-inch polycarbonate record. And I'm excited because I'm going to build a Makey Makey interface and a Scratch. So we're going to do an album release both on vinyl, so this very old way of doing things, and then we're going to have a record release on Scratch, right? So anybody in the world can access those songs, and then it'll be neat because all the kind of liner notes that you would normally have in a record will just be, you can click things and you'll hear me telling you about the record.
Cool. I'm going to go to your slides that you shared a little bit and just bring back kind of like, I feel like this is such a conceptual conversation anyway, but I'm going to just kind of go back with your slides and look at some of these things. And I'm going to end up losing the chat window now, Tom, because this is when I always lose the chat window if I make these big. So everyone, I'm sorry, that's what's going to happen.
Go into the view tab.
I know, thank you. I got it. It's just that I'm on, whatever you call it. So I just wanted to kind of go back because I thought maybe then we could see the pictures too. I think it's to minimize. I can't even see anything because of my own faces. All right, so here's your sound art with your middle school students that you taught. Whoa, did I do that?
No, that's just the bell in my building. It's pretty intense.
And then you had talked about the self-sound portraits, and I don't know that any of us really could visualize it. I mean, I tried to visualize it. This looks way cooler than I thought. So,
all right, so yeah, this is, each kid had a picture of themselves, right? So I photographed them on the day that I met them, and then I just had those printed out. And then they have that metal tape. So that metal tape is like the HVAC tape, so like the air conditioning tape. And we had spotty results. It worked pretty well. Some of the kids which was fine because we spent time trying to figure out like, why is this working for hers and not for him, which I think is a huge part of what we're all up to with this stuff, right? Like a huge part of what we're up to is like, why would it work for Marinika but not Jalen, and why would it work for Bree but not Sia? And so but what they did is they created portraits of themselves. They had portraits of themselves, and then they wrote kind of some ideas about what they thought about themselves, and then they got to make one noise about themselves.
Oh, cool.
And then we would hook it to the Makey Makey, and so they were making that noise inside of
Audacity, right?
Audacity, and then we talked about I love Audacity because it lets you stretch stuff, it lets you reverse things, it lets you do like these, to me, like kind of 6 basic things that I think can be really important, and lets kids make decisions, because very quickly you can have like a horror soundtrack, which a lot of kids love, right? That just kind of noise. And it's been really interesting, and it's taught me as an educator, someone who doesn't naturally go towards horror, it has taught me that that's not actually very good as an educator, that I need to be moving towards this thing that many, 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 many kids actually really like. And are using obviously as ways to think about like anxiety and those kind, like they're drawn to it for something. If they're drawn to it, I need to be making sure that I'm paying attention to it. And so, that's like, I was at an elementary, like Catholic school, and the kids were like, that sounds like the It soundtrack. And I was like, oh, you guys are 6, right? Like, I don't know how you know this. But
I had first graders tell me they watch Stranger Things.
Right. So anyway, and many of them, it doesn't give them bad, like all the things that I would say why it's not good for them. Like many of them just like, like that's just this, it's a different kind of medium, and they're just used to it. So, but anyway, so the kids got to pick what their sound was. So that's how it was a sound self-portrait, is they had to kind of mix that like visual of themselves, the thing that they chose to write about themselves, and then the sound that they wanted to, when you touched, when I reached out to one of those kids, and I love that. That's the other thing about Makey Makey. It's a simple thing, but I love that you physically have to reach out to someone. You have to reach out to something. That metaphor of that, like actually having to connect and build that circuit, I think is a really powerful thing, is that the way you create a deeper conversation with someone is by connecting with them, by physically taking the time. And so we talked about how that when someone reaches out to you, what signal do you send back? Like what noise comes back to them? So that's what those sound self-portraits were. And what I love about that, for me, we kind of invented that together. And I'm sure there are educators on this chat, who can think about, like, I could write a really great lesson about that. Like I could really plug in all of my standards for Texas science, or,
well, this is a great getting to know you first week activity. Like do a self-portrait, and then you frame it with the conductive tape, and you record a little blurb about yourself, or you record a sound about yourself. It's really kind of cool.
Yeah, and those pictures they're holding up, you probably can't see it, but they're holding up their names.
Yeah. Oh, so it helps you know their name.
I try to memorize their names like the first part of class.
So smart. Okay, this is the sculptural aspects. Wow, this is really cool. So I like this because I'm seeing, like, this is kind of getting the kids to know what other materials are conductive too. Like you've got that wire and the HVAC tape. I will tell you that the HVAC tape is so troublesome because the conductive is not adhesive. So you always have to like make sure it's touching the top somewhere. Because a lot of times the bottom, it doesn't. That's why you get all like serious, so I mean, it might be a little bit, but it's not like, because it's not made to be. So yeah, this is really cool. So how did you go about telling them to make this physical interface, like a sculptural aspect? Or
yeah, so I just pushed real early on, is I would go around, like the scratch part really took care of itself. The creating the sounds and kind of where they were coming from. The sculptural part was a little harder because, unlike the internet, unlike coding, unlike gaming, where they have kind of, they're native to that, working with their hands maybe isn't as easy. And so I would kind of just go around and encourage them. I was like, look, there needs to be physical something there. So I had to push them a little bit more on that. And so I have lots of found objects. I brought wire. I've had a roll of that copper wire. It's about $5 at a store. I have safety goggles and wire snips. So I was ready for them to. I just had the materials ready so that they could kind of build.
A good box of bricolage will get kids really creative. So.
And I think the other side is making sure that didn't have to, again, look like anything in particular was really important to the kids. They didn't have to make it look like a butterfly. It could just be, it could have kind of a sketchy kind of feel to it.
Yeah, I like that. You're definitely doing that a lot with these kids. Some things are really tangible and some things are really abstract. I got to get me one of these little blue speaker things.
They're really cool.
Just because we did mention all this stuff. So here is Mike's Instagram, and then actually the piano video that I was telling you about, where you really had me thinking about John Cage in my high school years, where I was really obsessed with noise and weird stuff like that. And then here's that PD art for teachers. Is that the best place to view some of those? Because I think that's what some people really wanted to see, was when you did the when you did this sound art. Is that on the Tenahir page?
Yes.
Or okay.
Yeah. So anything with like kids is going to be on the Studio 4 Dimensions. And anything with myself is going to be on Tenahir.
Yeah, and there's your cowboy concept that's going to be coming out.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to show kind of that partial build of what that was going to look like.
Yeah, I noticed there were just a couple things in Q&A, so I'm checking to make sure that those aren't, okay, those were just people talking there. Is there anything that anyone needed to ask that before we sign off? We got about 5 extra minutes here to talk. Okay, there are definitely some questions. These activities are great. Is it possible to share the plans or PowerPoint and the lesson for what is your duration? So maybe if you have time and you want to, on that PowerPoint, just list out the amount of time you took some of those things you said today. But if you don't, it's on the YouTube video. It'll be on the YouTube video too. But you did say you say they were at that summer camp for 5 hours a day? Is that 5 hours a day? Is that what you said? Or 1 hour a day?
They were in my class for 1 hour a day. So,
okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, so they got there in the morning. Yeah, no.
So that was like, what they did is 1 hour every day for a week, and then you got new kids, or some of the kids were the same, and it was all together. Some of them might have stayed 3 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Okay. Yeah. I mean, and that's really probably pretty typical of what you might do in a challenge like that during the classroom year.
Sure.
Would be, I'm sorry, I'm reading a question and trying to talk at the same time. Because we did that for the STEM in the gym. It was like 1 week of solid, every day there was an hour of mini lessons, and then the rest of it was like kids coming up with stuff. So yes, we will share the Google Slides and the video in the blog post and all the links we talked about. And this is a question from Stephanie. Have you also had the kids explore the Foley and sound engineer careers? That's a cool idea. Ben Burt and Wally, like Foley artists. So you did sound art, but what about Foley artists who make, fart noises and walking foots and rain taps? And that's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I will in the future for sure.
And Michael, did you need the other, I'm sorry, Michael and the panelist here, Michael in the, chat window is asking about the MK1 emulator, because I know you talked about it. I'm wondering if Mike needs a link. So maybe we'll get you a link here in a second.
I posted that link in the chat.
Oh, you did already? Yeah, you talked about that. You used that in the beginning, right? When you learned it?
Yeah, I mean, it's for me that's almost how I always start when I'm introducing the Makey Makey is using that.
Yeah, it's fun because it's got more notes than the piano.
But you can also like immediately, for me, when you talk about like getting kids, how do you teach kids how to make noise? Mm-hmm. That sampler also, you can record a little snippet in there, and then they can say like, Colleen, they just like, it's like once that happens, I mean, you can just see kids. I mean, I have had high schoolers that are just dumb. They don't want to be there. They're not, and they just can't stop smiling. They're just like, they really can't stop smiling. And had kids stop, the doorbell that you and I had talked about that my students built. I mean, I love that kind of Rube Goldberg idea that they spent 2 hours to make something that was so impractical in a lot of ways, but that just, they'll remember that forever. I mean, in some ways they did not spend that time building something impractical, because they built friendships, right? They built connections that are the most practical things on the planet. It's just that there's something that exists, and I think that's one of the things about Makey Makey that's so cool. It's like most of the things kids, that they're remixing, something already exists, but like that's not the point of Makey Makey. The point is like, I'm going to either improve upon it or do it in a way that's not as good, but that I did, that takes longer but is funner, or I don't know. I just think that it really makes technology this kind of participatory game, as opposed to like this huddled in my corner doing this thing.
I think I'm going to make my next challenge when I go to my daughter's school to teach a lesson is going to be an impractical invention. Can you make an impractical invention?
Right. So
which is basically the Simone Gertz. That's probably what you were about to say. Sorry.
No, there's my sculpture professor used to do. There's a style of Japanese inventions, and there's a name for it. I'll have to remember it.
Okay.
But there's actually a Japanese word for it. And so like one of them was like, so imagine like the clear water filters that you pour water into. Just imagine a clear container like that. And one of them those were straps on the sides of your legs, and you would put dirty clothes in, and they would seal. And when you walked,
wow, you wash them?
It was like a washing machine, right?
Cool.
But it was like completely, and there's a list of like the impracticality. So They're almost good enough inventions to be patented, but they're not quite good enough. And there's a Japanese word for those kinds of inventions, which is really cool.
There's one more question before we go, and that is, do you have any ideas on connecting art and math to your sound art ideas?
So yeah, I mean, you could send them my email and connect us.
Okay.
I have a million ideas, but like, you know, for me, so especially when you get into Audacity, when you start, there's a bunch of ratio stuff. When you start stretching, you can double stuff, triple stuff. There's a bunch of really great stuff inside of that, and reversing, and just, yeah, there's a ton of math that's involved, both real straightforward like that, and then also more just kind of abstract stuff. But I'd happily talk to whoever about that.
Okay. We are coming to the end of our time. Oh, I don't know if you can see all the love you're getting here in the chat, but they're saying that this is lots of ideas floating around in their brains. They just love it, and thank you. I think oh yeah, Ian's really excited about the horror sounds you talked about. I know when my kids played with Little Bits all the time, we would all be like, this is like a 90s horror movie, and then we'd sit there and be like, yeah. And we just love doing that. So I love the idea of sound art. I think it's just an avenue we haven't really explored very much in our webinars, and this is just very different for us, and we really appreciate you. You made it to 100, which means there are going to be at least 10 to 15 emails in my inbox of people saying, I couldn't get in the webinar, and I'll have to send them the link. Yeah, thank you.
Well, feel free to share my email with anyone that's interested in connecting about stuff that maybe have other questions or other ideas or want to collaborate with a little small town in Tennessee.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks
so much, Mike. Oh, Tom's going to
mention one other quick thing. I'm going to be in LA in a couple weeks leading a workshop, a Train the Trainer workshop. And I announced this on the Educators Facebook group, the Makey Makey Educators Facebook group. So if you're not a member of our Facebook group, come on over and join. It's an active, very supportive group of people, but I'll be in the LA area September 4th. And there's still a few spots left for that. And and I also just want to mention how grateful I am for some of the ideas that we heard today. For me, as a parent, I've got a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old, and I'm a musician, and my kids love music. But I got to say is that we never looked at music the way that you are looking at music.
Right.
It's like we've promoted as parents, my wife and I, music lessons. Not an exploration of sound. So this really hit me today as just I feel like I sort of missed an opportunity with my own kids. You know, we all listen to music, but we don't explore sound like you're doing.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really cool idea. We really appreciate you, Mike. And and we will have another webinar next month. Will be our Instructables Teacher Hub webinar with Becky Stern, who I'm a serious fangirl of, and Jessica Davis King, who's their education lead at Instructables. So we'll not just be talking the word Instructables over and over again. We will talk about classroom ideas and that too. So
really cool people.
Yeah, really cool people. Not as cool as Mike.
If we're heading out, like, and you talked about ribs, I was just gonna end with like kind of playing some harmonica for everyone as they.
I love that. I'd love it. Please do. Thank you.
Mike, you are now officially an international musician.
Oh, yeah, that's live concert, right?
Live concert to an international audience.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.